Over $10 trillion in global wealth has evaporated from markets in just a matter of months. Entire banks have collapsed under the weight of rising interest rates. Mortgage payments are skyrocketing. The price of everyday essentials feels like it has doubled overnight. The financial system is flashing red, and no one seems to know what comes next. Investors are wondering, is this just another hiccup, or the beginning of a deeper unraveling? Households are feeling the pressure, governments are scrambling. And underneath it all sits a hidden force that has shaped every major financial storm of the last century. In the next few minutes, we will pull back the curtain on the real drivers of inflation, trace the true origins of today's crisis, and expose how central banks' institutions designed to stabilize the economy have become the quiet architects of the chaos we are all living through now. Ever feel like your money just does not go as far as it used to? That everything, from groceries to gas, is getting more expensive? This is not just a feeling. It is a lived reality for millions. But what if the force behind this economic squeeze, the hidden hand shaping every financial crisis you have seen, is not some faceless market mechanism but a group of institutions designed to prevent this very thing? Today, we are pulling back the curtain on the true history of inflation and exposing how central banks have become the architects of the financial chaos we see all around us. Let us start with a simple idea: money. Most of us think of money as a stable measure of value, something solid we can rely on. But in reality, its value is constantly being manipulated, shaped, and distorted. And the primary manipulators? Central banks. Their main tool is the interest rate. When central banks lower rates, they make it cheaper to borrow money. That sounds like a good thing on the surface. It encourages borrowing. It encourages spending. It pushes businesses and consumers to invest in the future. So when you or I take out a mortgage, or when corporations finance a new factory, that is partially the result of these lowered rates. The economy feels like it is humming along, demand rises, people spend. But here's the catch. When demand starts to outpace supply, prices rise. Slowly at first, then faster, and that is the seed of inflation. For decades, central banks have operated under the belief that they can perfectly manage this process, that they can find a sweet spot. A steady 2 to 3% annual increase in prices. Not too hot, not too cold. Just enough to keep people spending, investing, and driving growth. But history tells a very different story. Because every time central banks try to fine-tune the economy, they set off massive boom and bust cycles. Think about it. Artificially low interest rates create a party. A frenzy, everyone is borrowing. Everyone is spending. Asset prices from stocks to housing soar. It feels like prosperity. But it is not built on productivity. It is built on cheap debt. It is a bubble. And bubbles always pop. This strategy went into overdrive after the 2008 financial crisis. The global economy teetered on the brink of collapse. To prevent a full-blown depression, central banks led by the U.S. Federal Reserve launched an unprecedented experiment called quantitative easing, or QE. Here's what that really means. They created trillions of dollars out of thin air. Not metaphorically, literally. And used that money to buy government bonds and other financial assets. The result? A flood of new cash into the financial system. Interest rates plummeted to near zero. The goal was to stimulate growth, and in some ways, it worked. But it came with a massive side effect. That flood of money poured into financial markets. Stock prices soared. Real estate prices surged. Cryptocurrencies boomed. The rich got richer. But the real economy, the one the average person lives in, chugged along slowly. Wages stayed mostly flat. The cost of living kept creeping up. Here is where it gets especially dangerous. This policy meant to rescue the economy ended up creating one of the biggest wealth gaps in modern history. Because those with asset stocks, homes, investments watched their wealth explode, while everyone else struggled to keep up. That is one of the most insidious effects of modern central banking. It amplifies inequality. It rewards speculation over productivity, and it leaves the average worker exposed. Then came the pandemic. Global supply chains collapsed. Entire economies shut down. In response, central banks did what they do best. They opened the floodgates again. Rates were slashed. Trillions more were created. Governments handed out stimulus checks. It was a double-barreled injection of money into the economy. More cash chasing fewer goods. It was the perfect recipe for an inflationary explosion. And explode it did. Suddenly, that stable 2% inflation target was nowhere in sight. prices surged. Rent, food, gas, used cars, everything. And for the first time in decades, the pain of inflation hit almost every household at once. Now central banks are trapped. To fight the very inflation they help create, they have to do the opposite of what they have done for over a decade. They have to raise interest rates. And fast. This is the bust. Higher rates make borrowing more expensive. Loans dry up, spending slows, asset prices fall, and the economy contracts. It is like slamming the brakes on a speeding car. And the system cannot handle it. We have already seen the cracks. Banks that had loaded up on long-term government bond safe assets, or so they thought, suddenly found those bonds were worth far less as rates soared. Depositors got nervous. Money started to move. Panic set in. And just like that, banks failed. Not because of fraud. Not because of risky loans. But because of interest rate shocks caused by the very same central banks trying to fix the mess they created. These failures are not isolated. They are symptoms of a fragile system. A system built on the illusion of stability. A system where money itself is distorted. To understand where this can lead, look no further than the 1970s. It was the era of the Great Inflation, a decade marked by skyrocketing prices, stagnant growth, and political panic. Back then, it was a mix of rising oil prices, war spending, and loose monetary policy that fueled the fire. The central bank, fearing a recession, kept interest rates low. Too low, for too long. Inflation took root. It became embedded in the economy. Businesses raised prices in anticipation of costs going up. Workers demanded higher wages. A vicious cycle began. Eventually, in the early 1980s, it took a radical move by the Federal Reserve, brutally high interest rates to kill inflation. But the price was steep. A deep, punishing recession. And that is the lesson. Every time central banks try to smooth over the bumps, avoid short-term pain, and keep the party going, they end up creating something far worse. By manipulating interest rates, they distort every signal in the market. They send investors chasing yield in risky places. They encourage debt over savings. They inflate bubbles that always burst. Businesses take on too much leverage. Consumers spend beyond their means. And when the tide turns, the entire system strains under the pressure. So, where does this leave us now? We are living through the consequences of decades of flawed central bank policy. The inflation that is eating away at your savings. The instability in the banking system. The fear of what comes next. None of it is accidental. This is the inevitable hangover from a party fueled by cheap money. Central banks, who claim to be the guardians of stability, have instead become the drivers of volatility. They have widened the gap between rich and poor. They have fueled one bubble after another. And they have left the rest of us holding the bill. Understanding this history is the first step. Because this is not about charts, jargon, or academic theories. It is about your money, your savings, your future. The truth is, these crises were not inevitable. They were choices. Choices made by institutions who prioritize short-term gain over long-term stability. The real path to a healthy economy does not run through constant manipulation. It runs through sound money, clear signals, and an economy where the price of money is not distorted for political or financial convenience. Thank you for watching. If this video opened your eyes to the real story behind our economy, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you do not miss our next deep dive. See you next time.